And therefore, you need to be unanimous. 12 jurors have to be in accord, in agreement, on the same page, saying, execute her. And absent that, even if it's one, she doesn't die. And so I think it's an uphill battle for the prosecutor. But at the end of the day, this was a heinous, brutal murder. And, sex appeal shouldn't allow her to get away with it. It didn't in terms of the culpability and responsibility. They found her accountable and said that there was an aggravated circumstance which would justify death. Whether they're able to flip the switch is always another question. So we'll be following it, and we'll see what she has to say.
Yeah, okay. A caller wants to get in. Let's go over to 352. I believe this is Florida. Please state your name and where you're calling from and what you want to talk about. You're on with Tom and Joey.
Yeah, my name's Loretta Lease from Inverness, Florida.
Good evening. You're on the phone with Tom and Joey Jackson. Tom Mesereau and Joey Jackson.
I got a question. I don't think Jodi Arias is going to get the death penalty. I think she'll get life. I want to know what life will be like for her in prison. Will she be confined to herself? Will she be among other inmates? What will life be in Arizona State?
I don't practice in Arizona. It's Tom Mesereau. I don't practice in Arizona. I can't tell you exactly what death row in Arizona is like, but based on what I know about other death rows, it will not be pleasant. You'll be isolated much of the time. It will be a boring, endless, days of just very little hope, very little interaction with others. It could be a very, very, very unhappy, difficult way to live.
No question. You agree with that, Tom, Joey?
I second the motion. Without question. Strongly.
Can you bring us up to date on Mr. Blade Runner, Oscar Pistorius himself? What's the latest?
Oscar Pistorius. The latest is apparently it continues. When I say it, what happens is that, as we all know, the judge made a decision. In South Africa, they don't have jury trials. It's a judge trial. The judge, Masipa, in this case, she's assisted by two assessors who render a decision. That decision has been made, and he was not found guilty of murder, which would mean intent and premeditation. Instead, he was found guilty of culpable homicide. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that through acts of negligence, the judge determined that he's responsible for Reva Steenkamp's guilt. Of course, Reva Steenkamp being his girlfriend. The prosecution strongly disagrees with that assessment. They believe it was premeditated, but you know what? That ship has sailed. The bottom line is the judge said you're guilty, but you're guilty of culpable homicide. You were negligent. Now, the issue, of course, is the sentencing, and so therefore, in South Africa, you have a sentencing hearing. At that time, the prosecution is allowed to put on witnesses, and those witnesses on the stand give some indication to the judge of what we call as lawyers mitigation. What that means in English is, why should the sentence be light? Why should the judge impose something that would be non-incarceratory, meaning not in jail? And so that's what we've seen. We've seen the prosecutor cross-examine witnesses from the defense witnesses saying, you know what, he shouldn't go to jail. He should get community service. What was interesting, though, was when one of the witnesses said that, the judge said, well, what did you have in mind? What do you mean by community service? Now, that was telling to me in as much as if the judge was not contemplating that, the judge would not have even have entertained it by asking a question, at least I don't believe. I mean, if the judge was inclined just to consider jail, but maybe she's just being fair and reasonable and wants to explore all the facts and all the issues. And there have been some witnesses who have suggested that he should be in prison, that the prison's abusive, that he would subject himself to, different type of gangs that would commit violence against him, and that he's disabled and prison's not the place. And, if he was going to be confined, maybe it should be home confinement. So it rages on, and the judge has to continue to listen to that, and the judge, of course, has to listen to the prosecution, cross-examine those witnesses, and the prosecution put on witnesses of its own concerning why a jail sentence would be appropriate. Now, pretty much it's based on precedent, and so precedent suggests that in these types of cases you can get anything from probation to 15 years in jail. And so it'll be up to what Judge Nasipa does. She has not done it yet, but we suspect that, any day now she'll be making a decision upon whether Oscar stays home, goes to jail, does community service, or somewhere in between. So that's where we are with the Blade Runner.
And Tom, what did you feel about the two murder charges? The judge, or my lady, as they say it over there. What's your thought on her verdict?
Well, I thought both sides were very effective. I thought the prosecutor was very, very prepared, very effective, persuasive, but it was kind of abusive and kind of abrasive, but I didn't think that would hurt him with a judge who's probably used to that kind of courtroom behavior. I thought the defense also were very prepared, very detailed, and I thought I understand her verdict. I was actually a little surprised by it. I thought, given what I knew about the situation, the premises where all this happened was very small, very confined. The idea that he didn't know she was in the bathroom seemed very implausible to me. The idea that it was strictly an accident seemed implausible. I thought that the evidence that he's been rather reckless with guns and abusive with guns was troubling. I understand the verdict. I was a little bit surprised by it, but I think she's going to give him some jail time. I do think the defense has been very compelling in explaining that because he's disabled and doesn't have legs, that he will be subject to abuse, to gang rape, to all sorts of problems in prison. And I think that's got to be troubling the judge a lot. Apparently the defense has also put on evidence that he's basically a ruined person in that country, that his employment prospects are very poor. His reputation has been destroyed emotionally and psychologically. He's been completely shattered by this. I think she's wondering whether she wants to subject him to this kind of abuse, if that's the only option there is. I don't know if there's a way to take someone who's disabled and give them some type of isolated, or quarantined, form of imprisonment. I don't know if that exists in South Africa, but I just believe, based on her comments, that he wasn't truthful, and some other things she said when she convicted him of culpable homicide. I got a feeling he's going to do some time.
And Joey, what was your opinion on the judge's, a.k.a. my lady's, verdict?
I think pretty much Tom said it all, although, it was one of those things that could have gone either way. One of the most fascinating things I found about the law, and this is ever since law school and ever since I've seen great lawyers like Tom Mesereau in a courtroom just mesmerize people, you have two professors, and one of the professors is the prosecution, and they're stating their piece, and they're strong, and they're passionate, and they're compelling, and they're persuasive. And then you say, wow, that's got to be the case. And then the defense gets up, and they're equally passionate and persuasive and convincing. And you sort of are left there saying, boy, what do I do? And in this particular case, I certainly could see merits to both sides. I could see the judge shutting it down and saying, this is premeditated. The 4 shots were excessive. The cell phones in the bathroom, the argument, the issues regarding the expert, what they found in her stomach relative to when she went to sleep. It would cause it to question whether or not, they were up or whether they were really sleeping, as Oscar Story said. So it's a really hard judgment. I would not have at all been surprised if she held him accountable, to the top count, to the murder count. But I could see, based upon the defense and their passion, what they brought to it, that she could find negligence, which is what she did. And I always was very interested, and it fascinated me, and it fascinates me to this day about the law, how, you have point A and point B. And we all may take different roads to get there, but one of the great things about the law is if you find a way to logically, to rationally, to chronologically, to just in a very organized way get yourself from point A to point B, man, you could dig, you can zag, you could swag, you can fall. And I think that's what happened here. The judge said, look, I think it's culpable homicide, and she found a way to get from that point, from the point she was to that particular point. And so, who knows? Justice is elusive sometimes. But right now, I think the justice is hinging upon the verdict that she gives. So let's see whether, her verdict is he goes to jail, or her verdict is that he stays home confinement, or that he gets probation. Because after all, perhaps some of those other factors that Tom mentioned, in terms of whether jail's the place for him with the gang rape and he's subjecting a disabled person to be there, and the fact that he's ruined and his reputation, you know, maybe the judge says that that's a significant punishment too, and therefore keeps him out of jail. I mean, I would, but that might be something that she finds persuasive to her.
Tom, you agree, disagree?
No, I agree with everything Joey has said. I think, as I said before, both sides were extremely professional and very prepared, and both were very, very persuasive. I looked at her background. You know, she was raised in Soweto. I mean, some pretty tough circumstances, and nobody ever handed her anything in life, and she apparently just has devoted a lot of time to being a social worker, to working with victims of domestic violence. I know that she was a protester who was jailed at one point, and they asked her to clean the bathrooms, and she refused in the jail. And apparently she was educated, I think, mostly in her 40s, I think, was when she went to law school, and it's a very, very, very accomplished, very hard-working, survivor type of judge and no-nonsense kind of person, with apparently a history of great concern for domestic violence victims. So I kind of thought there was a chance she would see this guy as a spoiled brat with a sense of entitlement, reckless with guns, reckless with his behavior, always thinking he can get away with things. And I had a feeling that might affect her judgment. And like Joey said, there was a possibility he was going down for murder. I think the fact that she put all those potentially emotional issues aside and looked at the law and said to herself, have they proven murder? And concluded they had not, I think just shows what a professional judge she is. Careful reasoning, careful logic, following the law to the T. But I do think some of the comments she made about him, as she imposed, guilt for culpable homicide, were a little bit troubling, and I had a feeling when she made those comments that she might whack him at sentencing. So we'll see.
And just to be clear, just one other quick point regarding the comments I'm talking about. She was talking about Asclepius being an evasive witness, and that goes to his credibility. And, so whether she takes that out on him at the sentencing phase remains to be seen, but it was clear that she did have some issues with his testimony as to whether he was being truthful or whether he was I'll just say being less than truthful. I never like to call anyone a liar. So we'll see what happens with that.